Hi people, I want to take advantage of this whilst I've got the sound back. I was having some sound issues for a while, but I've got it back now. Before I get into the main purpose of this video, just a little roundup of some of the things that have been going on in the news. That devastating earthquake in Myanmar. Apparently there was the Burmese military opened fire on a Chinese aid convoy. That's not the most sensible thing to do, given that China is one of the Burmese regime's only allies. But it just shows how awful the situation is, that this was a country that was already affected by civil war and is now dealing with this natural disaster. Paradoxically, though, sometimes natural disasters can force a ceasefire in countries that have ongoing conflicts. And we've seen that in other examples. I think it was the case in Libya, unless I'm mistaken, that devastating flooding in 2023 from Storm Daniel that killed thousands in Libya. I think it ended some of the factional infighting, at least for a while. So natural disasters can sometimes have that effect. Other things going on in the news. The actor Val Kilmer passed away this week, only 65. I didn't know him very well as an actor, but obviously I knew who he was. I remember his role as Mad Martigan in the fantasy film Willow. I always thought he was very amusing in that role. And of course, Batman Forever. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been arrested and is standing trial in The Hague for crimes against humanity conducted during his controversial war on drugs. There were a lot of extrajudicial killings going on there. Now, like we have seen it with the trend in recent years, Duterte has the trend by which I mean sort of populist right-wing leaders. Duterte has no shortage of followers in the Philippines, and they're very angry about this decision and they're protesting. But a lot of Filipinos also welcome it. I have no problem with some sort of campaign against violent drug dealers. And, I hate drugs, I hate what they do to people, but it is a reality that many, many innocent Filipinos were killed in the crossfire in this war, and many people were just gunned down without any trial. There are very serious questions, and the sort of human rights abuses that went on under Duterte could rival anything that happened under Ferdinand Marcos. So many Filipinos welcome this decision. But the main story is Trump's tariffs. Now, I'm not an economist, and I'm always a little bit cautious about talking too much on economic matters. Because I'm not an economist, I can't say this is going to have the particular effect. But I don't think it takes a genius to work out that no one really benefits from trade wars. And Trump has indeed smacked 10% tariffs on this country. Now, I don't think there's any reasonable way that Keir Starmer can say to the British public, oh, the state visit's going ahead. I know Starmer was very resistant to calls previously for the state visit to be dropped. At this point, with the tariffs having gone ahead, I just see no logical reason why we should invite Donald Trump to this country anytime soon. Because it isn't a prerequisite that an American president will definitely visit the UK. Most do. In fact, in the last 70 years, every American president, with the exception of Lyndon Johnson, has visited the UK. Some of those were informal visits as part of a G20 or a G8, and some were full-on state visits. I think Trump has been given more than enough hospitality as it is. I don't think he should be allowed into this country in this context. I certainly think some of the people around him. I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene should ever be allowed in this country after her insults towards British nationals, particularly towards a Sky reporter who was only doing her job. I guess this video is a bit of a follow-up to the one I made previously, Trump and Vance are destroying America's reputation. That got quite a lot of responses. It had over 500 views, and a number of people said, what reputation? That's a fair point. What reputation? I mean, America is the most powerful country in the world. There's no point being flippant about that. It is. It's the most powerful country in the world. It is still the biggest economy, although for some time now the Chinese economy has been fast on trajectory to potentially catch up with that. But it's by far the highest military expenditure of a major power. It's a major, major country. What I want to talk about is not so much the fallout from the trade war. One of my subscribers, Declan, you suggested this could lead to a recession. Again, I'm no expert, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did, and it's very concerning. But someone said in one of those comments, God forbid, this isn't verbatim, but they were arguing, God forbid that a president put his own people first. But is Donald Trump putting the American people first? Is this going to benefit the American people? It's going to be ordinary Americans that hurt from this. So anyone who thinks this is just Trump being tough and standing up for the American people, I think that's a delusional position. It's going to be ordinary Americans that suffer when there's reciprocal tariffs imposed. And, different countries are going to make their own decisions as to what they want to push back. Some are being cautious about it. India, even China, the UK have been so far somewhat cautious in what's being reciprocated. But I do think that Donald Trump needs to be stood up to. I do think if all Western countries really push back hard, Trump will back down, because bullies always do. And I do think Trump is a bully. I think the way they treated Volodymyr Zelensky was disgusting. Interestingly enough, it's notable that Russia isn't getting any tariffs. Make of that what you will. This claim that Trump was recruited in the 1980s under the name Krasnov shouldn't perhaps be totally dismissed. Byline News, it's a new publication, they spoke of a Kazakh intelligence person who mentioned that in the 1980s the Soviet Union was looking at senior Western business leaders. Now, the fact that Trump had been approached at that time, potentially, doesn't necessarily mean he's still in the employ of the KGB's successor, the FSB. But look at Trump's antics. He's been parroting Russian propaganda. He's reluctant to publicly criticize Putin. This week, apparently, he's been frustrated with Putin. But, compared to the way he's treated Western leaders, absolutely Trump has been reluctant to criticize Putin, parroting Russian propaganda. It all points to someone who isn't being a compromised sort of individual, because often it was believed that security agencies would go to individuals that they could exploit over some scandal. But in the case of Donald Trump, it may actually be someone who's a willing participant, perhaps because Trump feels that there's vested business interests. At first, this was kind of dismissed. I thought, no, Trump's not smart enough to be a spy. He's too vocal. But I wouldn't put it past the Russian intelligence agencies to actually go so far as to install someone who could be a potential American president, as indeed Trump now is. I was looking at, in boxing, I was looking at the Larry Holmes Ray Mercer fight the other day, and Donald Trump was there. It was in the Trump Casino. I think it was 1992. The Trump Plaza. Is it really, really far-fetched that a prominent American businessman, Donald Trump, could have been approached by Russian intelligence services in the 80s to undermine America at a future date? I wouldn't totally dismiss it. Because, frankly, with Donald Trump, anything is possible. But what I want to talk about here is not so much, I don't think American people are going to benefit from trade wars. I do think Starmer needs to push back a bit. I'm not saying aggressively so, but something. We cannot face 10% tariffs and do absolutely nothing. And as for a state visit, if Starmer is deluded enough to think that this will go ahead anytime soon, I think that would be a big insult to the British people. And it will make him look weak. It's not diplomacy, it's not strength. It will make Starmer look weak. But there is an interesting side effect of all of this. It was traditionally believed that it's only the left that don't like Trump. But what this is actually going to do is force conservatives and right-wingers in a lot of the countries being hit to actually distance themselves from Trump. Because the likes of Reform and the Conservative Party, of course they're going to criticise Labour. They're going to say, they've made bad decisions and all the rest of it. But Farage cannot honestly be seen to be too pro-Trump at this point. I know Trump's his great buddy, but he's going to look rather unpatriotic if he is excessively pro-Trump at a time when Trump is imposing 10% tariffs on this country. So it may actually weaken reform. I mean, I'm not impressed by reform. I think Farage is Trump's poodle, and I think that their stance on Russia is highly questionable. But, say what you want about Labour, but they made a good point. If they cannot control 5 MPs, how on earth are they going to handle running the country? It's something to consider. But yeah, I think we're going to see that in a lot of countries that are being hit. I mean, look at Italy. Giorgia Meloni have been pro-Trump. But, as part of the European Union, Italy's now being hit by those tariffs. We're going to see this across the board. It's going to make America more unpopular, and that's what we're going to see. But what I want to talk about is basically my views on America, my views on how I approach American culture. I wouldn't go so far as say let's have a complete boycott of everything American. As much as I understand those sentiments, I just don't think it's practical. I mean, I don't go to McDonald's anyway. I think it's overrated, and frankly, you feel hungry afterwards. I think their portions are quite small. I don't particularly like McDonald's. I don't like the atmosphere in McDonald's. Starbucks is overpriced. It's okay, but I wouldn't say it's exceptional. But then, where do you draw a line? I watch Netflix. So could I sort of say, oh, well, it's an American company, I'm just going to stop watching it? Well, frankly, I'm in the middle of some series that I'm watching, and it also has British productions. So, you cut off Netflix, you're also cutting off international productions. I just don't think a complete boycott of everything American is particularly practical, because it is so massive. American cultural influence is so huge. If you really got purist about this, you'd find it's actually quite difficult. It's a bit like a total boycott on Chinese goods. Then you'd have to stop using your laptop because there's a reasonable chance that your phone or your laptop was made in China. So it's the same principle. I don't think it's possible to have a 100% boycott of all things American, or at least it would be a real challenge, and I'm not prepared to do that. I think it would be petty and vindictive. But I'm fine with certainly not going to McDonald's or, geopolitically speaking, I do think Brexit has made us vulnerable. Even the Daily Mail today said Brexit Britain is hit by 10% tariffs. I'm thinking, well, wait a second, you promoted Brexit. Now, I don't want to reopen old wounds with that, but I do think Brexit has made us overly reliant on America. And I just don't go along with this idea the Starmer seems to have, well, we better not provoke Trump. Trump's unstable. It doesn't take a lot of provocation to do what he's done. So I do think we need to seriously have a wake-up call regarding the special relationship. Mark Carney of Canada recently said effectively, American-Canadian relationship, it's over. I'm not sure if I'd go that far with the UK, but I do think we need to get a reality check when it comes to the special relationship, because I don't think it's viewed equally both ways. I don't think, certainly not the current American administration, and I think a lot of Americans, frankly, don't think much of the special relationship. I think it's always been something that's more been from the British perspective. And of course, decent American presidents like Barack Obama have always been polite and respectful and diplomatic. But realistically, America's at least 6 times bigger than the British economy, at least. It's never going to be a level playing field. Even if Kamala Harris had become president, we wouldn't have got a fair trade deal out of America. I mean, certainly she wouldn't have ignited a trade war, but I just think we need to see the reality. America is not our closest ally at the moment. I think we need to get a lot closer to the Commonwealth, and yes, the European Union. I'm not talking about rejoining the EU, but I'm sick and tired of this hysterical reaction that people have when a British Prime Minister wants to have good relations with France or Germany or the Netherlands or Ireland. It makes all the sense in the world that we be working with our closest neighbours. Daniel Hannan recently had a piece in the Telegraph where he was talking about Canada, Australia and some other Commonwealth countries are the only countries we can trust, because he was talking about how relations with America had declined. Well, Really? Can we not work with our continental neighbours? Sure, we're going to have difference of opinion on some issues around the small boats and some other things, but I just don't think it makes any sense to have this constantly belligerent attitude to our closest neighbours. And, no harm to Daniel Hannan, but it's Tories like him that frankly were weak on Trump for a long time. They failed to condemn him when they should have in his first administration. The British right has a long track record of pandering to Trump, although Starmer is as well. But it's sad to see what we're seeing. But, I know that there are many, many decent Americans out there who are deeply, deeply embarrassed by this. They know it's not making America stronger. And I wouldn't endorse a situation where there is a generic anti-Americanism to the point that individual Americans were faced hostility. I think that would be wrong. Many, many Americans are anti-Trump. So it would be wrong to just say let's be against 340 million people. But I have very little sympathy for Trump voters. I mean, they can't say, oh, I didn't know any better. They were warned. They were told, do not vote for this man. So I've limited sympathy for people who voted for him and now regret their decision. Because it's not like they had no precedent. Remember, Trump's been president. He served an entire term. I think any American who looked at what he done to instigate the violence of January the 6th and everything else he's done since and said, oh, I didn't know, I've limited sympathy for that. I've limited sympathy for people who voted for Trump and now turn around and say, oh, I regret it. Well, you had the chance. Trump's even talking about a third term. I don't know constitutionally if he's able to do that, because it would be, since Roosevelt had 4 terms, the Constitution only allows for 2 consecutive terms. Of course, Trump will be going for a second consecutive term on top of a non-consecutive. I'm not sure how that would work. Of course, he'll be 82 in 3.5 years. So, but without question, Trump and Vance are not making America stronger again. If anything, they're making it weaker. They're certainly making it more unpopular. And I just think, I find it sad that dogmatic Brexiteers are still so fixated on their hostility to the EU that they seem to think, well, we'll get closer to the Commonwealth and we can't trust America. They've finally woken up to that. They've finally woken up to the fact that we can't trust Donald Trump. But, I'm all for working with the Commonwealth, but we cannot work with the Commonwealth alone. We have to work with our European neighbours. And doing so is not a betrayal of Brexit. It's not rejoining the EU. I get really frustrated with the dogmatic attitude they have to that. We have to be realistic in this world. We have an American administration we can't trust. We have a hostile China, a hostile Russia. So we have to look at the Commonwealth for sure. But yes, the European Union as well. We have to work with the European Union. I just don't understand the hostility to the idea of even working with the EU. Not rejoining, just working with them. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but it's a sad situation we're seeing. I don't see myself as anti-American, and I'd be a hypocrite because there is a lot of things, I watch Netflix, there's examples of American culture in our everyday lives. I don't think it's realistic to just say, let's just totally ignore it. But I do think we could say, that famous speech that Hugh Grant gives in Love Actually, we may be a small country. Actually, we're not a small country. We're smaller than America, but we're not a weak country. Britain's a G7 member. We're in the G20. We're in the Permanent Security Council. We're the world's 6th biggest economy. We're not a small country. So Starmer needs to show that he will push back a bit. He needs to show that he's not Trump's puppet. He needs to show that he's prepared to stand up to Donald Trump more than he has done so already. This idea that I'm hearing from the likes of GB News, we better not provoke him further, it's pathetic. It's utterly pathetic. It's not patriotic. And I think it exposes Nigel Farage. He's always pandering to Trump, grinning like a Cheshire cat. I just don't think it's patriotic. I think Donald Trump is potentially a Russian asset. I don't think we could trust him. We should work with him where is necessary, but like I say, bullies only understand one language, and I just don't agree with this approach of we need to be careful with Trump, we better not provoke him. That invitation needs to be rescinded right now. Trump will have a tantrum, let him. Let him. I'll wrap this up, but I'm not anti-American, but I think at this time, unfortunately, Donald Trump's actions have absolutely changed the nature of the Anglo-American relationship. That's sad, but it's the truth.